SSCA Easier and Safer Cruising Summit. Tricks, tips, techniques, and solutions to problems. All of us have them. Special ways we have found to make our SSCA cruising life easier and safer. Don't be surprised to hear what seems like contradictory opinions. We purposefully have individual conversations with each speaker or couple so they do not hear what others are saying. They are not arguing with or biased by someone else's opinion. In cruising, as in life, there is no one solution for everyone. So we hope listeners realize these are personal opinions based on individual experience, and they will form their own judgment for their own situation. Well, here we are. I'm sure that you've all been waiting anxiously for weeks since our last episode about anchors for this sequel episode on anchoring. You'll discover what you might do to save your relationship and keep peace aboard when it comes to anchoring. Here, ideas about choosing chains, how much, snubbers, and other anchoring accessories. And find out what to do in some special situations, such as dealing with a sideways swell in the anchorage to prevent that annoying rolling. Last episode's short subject, we discussed the memorable rewards of meeting the local people where we travel. This episode will talk about that other group of fantastic people we meet, fellow cruisers. How can we keep camaraderie, information sharing, and irreplaceable personal interaction alive in this age of electronics and the internet? In our tips and tricks category, Bill is going to tell us an unusual thing to do with Ziplock bags. And we conclude the episode with longtime Commodore Sherry McCampbell inspiring us with reflections on what cruising is for her. And she speaks for so many of us. I'll be having conversations with Helen and Stefano P. Viali of Galaxy, catamaran advocates and charterers. Rudy and Jill Sachet of Briny Bug, known for their frugal cruising tips and trawler training. Eddie Keck of Single Malt, a Swiss circumnavigator and continuing active cruiser. Rob Dubin of Ventana, circumnavigator, filmmaker, and the creator of Sailing Quarterly video magazine. Dave and Sherry McCampbell of Soggy Paws the Monohull and Soggy Paws the Catamaran have written extensively for SSCA and several cruising magazines and given presentations at many GAMs and took on the formidable SSCA Destination Project. Karsten Bruning of Capri, Danish member and co-author of the book Capri, Sailing Distant Seas. He and his wife have been sailing 5 years and are in the midst of circumnavigation as well as exploring beyond the beaten path. Melinda Shell of Seashell. She and her late husband Harry have cruised extensively and have been long-time contributors to the SSCA Bulletin. Melinda is also heading up the SSCA Mentorship Program. Bill Cullen of Triumph, whose webinar, thebookofsail.com, was the most attended during the first virtual annual meeting. So without further ado, we join the conversation I'm having with Helen, telling me how anchoring really stressed her couple life.
But there are many drawbacks with sailing. I think Steph and I, if we were ever going to argue, we would be arguing over the anchoring. When you put the anchor down, there's always a problem. And I think I've found on my travels, every woman I spoke to said, we don't argue, but if we're ever going to have an argument, it's going to be over the anchoring. So I found out, meeting a lot of sailors, that somehow when people try to put the anchor down, the communication between the husband and the wife or the partners doesn't seem to always flow. And this is certainly what we discovered at the beginning, until you find your feet, and you understand what he means when he says something and what he understands when you reply.
When Luke and I started cruising, I think some of the most tense moments and some of the loudest yelling at each other was when anchoring. And it wasn't until we realized we had to have an SOP, or the Standard Operating Procedure in computer jargon, that things got a lot more peaceful. So, this is generally what we do. We're coming into an anchorage. I'm at the bow and Luke is at the helm. And luckily on our boat, Luke has a clear view of me and all forward of the helm. We quickly assess where we want to anchor in relationship to the shore, the reefs, other boats, and the depth. And we always want 360-degree swinging room, even though that may mean scoping out many different places, because sometimes getting 360 degrees with a giant trimaran like ours is something that you have to consider a lot. But if we want the safety and peace of mind, and we've seen it change, we always want that swinging room. We motor slowly up to the place and decide if we like it, or if we still like it even after we get there, after having seen it from a distance. Luke knows from practice when to go into neutral so that we're stopped forward motion right on the spot. And we've seen many boats dropping their anchor going at about 3 or 4 knots and then running over the anchor, and that's not a good practice. In the meantime, while we are cruising or gliding up to the anchoring spot, I've got the anchor just hanging, ready to drop. So it's over the bow roller and just ready to drop. And the anchor touches the bottom. We either let the wind push us back naturally and let out chain, or back slowly, letting out the chain at the same speed as we go. So the chain lays nicely. When it gets to the agreed scope, depending on Luke's determination of the depth of the water and all the things that need to be thought about, then we let the boat settle back naturally on its own. Like that, the anchor is already mostly dug in. And then we put on the bridle, and then Luke slowly backs to set while I feel the bridle, whether it goes tight, and watch the shore, taking reference points to see whether or not we move or we're staying still. When it looks like we've stopped and the anchor is pretty set in, I give a hand signal, and you can all agree to whatever hand signal you want for that, for Luke to pull harder. And then Luke gives more revs in reverse while I'm still looking at the shore and holding to see the tightness of the bridle line, to see if I feel any jumping of the chain as it goes, if it's dragging or it's going across any rocks or anything like that. And then when we see we don't move at all at the higher revs, and Luke holds it for a number of seconds, I give the OK signal, and what we use is the diving signal, the long distance OK signal with the hand over the head or the 2 arms over the head, like the ballet dancer. And then Luke slowly decreases the revs, let us settle back in place, and I put the lock on the windlass so the chain cannot feed out accidentally by itself. one of the areas where there's some of the most stress and some of the most times where people get into arguments with their mates aboard, and that has to do with anchoring. So any kind of advice or any kind of clues or tricks about anchoring would be really appreciated.
You've got to have an anchor that's large enough for the conditions, both wind and seas. You've got to have an anchor that is compatible with the type of bottom that you're anchoring in, and you have to use adequate scope. And the higher the winds and the bigger the seas, the more scope you need. What a lot of people fail to realize is at 5-to-1 scope, your anchor has half the holding power as it does at 10-to-1. And at 7-to-1, your anchor has only 2/3 of the holding power as it would have at 10-to-1. But to come up with accurate calculations for scope, you have to include the depth of water, the height of your freeboard to where the road meets the deck, any additional tide that's going to occur, and the three additional items that people never think about is how deep the anchor buries, the height of the waves, and the height of any storm surge. As far as how deep the anchor can bury in sand, it'll only bury maybe 1 or 2 feet at most. But in soft bottoms, it can go down 10, 12, 15 feet, and even more in extremely high wind conditions, such as hurricanes. If you don't add all those, if you don't consistently think of those 6 items, then there's probably going to be a mistake made when the winds pick up. Just about anything works at 1 or 2 knots of breeze, but it's when the wind gets stronger and stronger that these factors become very important.
We often can come across people who lower their anchor electrically. Something which we have great difficulties in understanding. You approach an anchor place and you choose it. Perhaps you're lucky you can see right down, and then the person in the bows gives a sign, now, and the anchor drops. And then you have the anchor right on the spot. You can't do that, and you can't have that when you lower it electrically. Of course, heaving it up electrically, I won't like to do that by hand anymore now these days. Certainly not with that heavy anchor. But otherwise, well, and the next thing is, we normally just let go a bit of chain and wait until it starts to stretch. Then we ease off again. Perhaps the boat starts to move to the right or to the left. It doesn't matter, and we go back. And we normally don't use more than 4 to 5 times the depth for chain. And
3 times length.
Even sometimes only 3 times. And we are ready to let go more if necessary. That reduces, of course, the circle of your movement. That can be of an advantage in a very narrow anchorage, and it can be an advantage when other boats are close by. So that is one thing. And once the anchor is there, we always give full reverse for a while. Mm-hmm. And we check a transit bearing across.
Until the chain is stretched.
Well, until the chain is, of course, bar tight. And then we check the transit bearing, and if we don't move, then it's okay, we can stop the engine. Then it is to say that we have allowed us, since many years now, it's the second one, a stainless steel cable. Well, it seems to be a luxury, but it's not such a luxury when you look at it from all angles. Of course, you don't have to galvanize it. It will rust this stainless steel will last, but it will take a long time until it does. But the great advantage is it is so smooth that when it goes down into the chain locker, it lays itself nicely around, not just one big heap, which when you are at sea drops down, and when you want to let go your anchor, the anchor chain does not come out of your chain locker. And many people always have to go down to the chain locker and loosen the chain. You don't with a stainless steel chain, but don't buy a Chinese one. Try to get one from Germany, from the original factory.
Okay, that's very interesting. I never heard that reflection about the stainless steel chain. You're right, most of us think, oh, that's what the super yacht guys have to show off. But, yeah, okay, that's a practical thing to know. I like your idea about maybe those people that have a windlass that can disengage the clutch, is go up to the point where you want to anchor and you stop your forward motion and then let free flow the chain so it just goes down immediately. And then we used to have a windlass that could do that. Unfortunately not anymore. But then we would let the wind blow us back, and you would hear the chain feed out by itself, and it would lay out very nicely as you were backing down with the wind. Naturally, the boat going back with the wind, not backing down with the engine. And then when you got to the amount of chain that you wanted, you engaged the clutch again, and then, like you say, wait until you come tight on the chain. Of course, we put our bridle, and then we do some reverse to make sure that we're holding well. But normally, if you do it that way, your anchor is already dug in most of the way.
If you ask me the number one safety thing to put on a boat, it would be a windlass and heavy ground tackle. And I'm a huge believer in a big, strong electric windlass, because there are lots of times when you drop your hook and for some reason either you drift back, or you end up a little too close to another boat, or too close to a rock or something. You don't end up where you think you're going to be. And if you have to pull it up hand over hand, you're not going to re-anchor. Or another boat maybe comes in and anchors near you, and you're angry, but he's not going to move. If you have an electric windlass, it's a matter of stepping on the button and pulling it up and moving somewhere else to be safe and have a secure, smooth, sleep-filled night. That's my number one recommendation, is big anchors, heavy ground tackle, and a strong windlass, so that you don't think twice about re-anchoring if you need to.
Now, on a catamaran, because of the weight concerned, the weight of the chain is a very important factor. So what I did in both my first and my second boat, I ended up buying a smaller chain, but I bought a high tensile chain. So what happens, I get more strength with a high tensile chain. Then, so the strength is more, so I know the chain isn't going to break, but the weight is less, which means that I can carry less weight up on the front of the boat where it's not desirable. And of course the length is the same, or I can get even longer chain, which gives more scope, and which makes it anchoring very safe. So what I do, when I can't see the bottom, I choose a patch of sand, try very hard to anchor in there, then put down as much scope as I normally do, 5 to 1, considering who is around me, of course. Then I put in reverse, I keep the boat in reverse for 30, 40 seconds, then I slowly increase the power. I get to about 2,000 revs on on both engines. And I used to do that with the bigger boat and the bigger engine. I do the same with the small boat and the smaller engine. And each boat, of course, is different. But when I get to about 2,000 revs and the boat doesn't move, then I'm happy. Most of the time, not all the time, most of the time, I also take the opportunity to go for a swim, get wet, and go and actually visually check the anchor. The only other thing that I need to consider, everybody needs to consider, is all the boats around you. If you're in a tidal area, where especially whether in a river or in a coastal way where the tide changes, sometimes monohulls and catamarans behave differently. So be aware of that. Maybe keep an eye or ask before you anchor. But that's all I could say.
When you look at chain, we really like to have the strongest chain we can, and that means G4 chain, which is called high tensile. Costs about the same weight as the BBB chain or G3 chain. And we've found over the last 13 years, I guess it's been, since we've been out, that you need somewhere between 200 and 300 feet of chain in order to cross Pacific, anchor in some of these deep anchorages. We have actually 300 feet aboard, and that's another reason to have a larger boat, is so that you can carry adequate chain to be able to get yourself down to the bottom with a reasonable scope. Obviously, an electric windlass and a strong roller are required to go with that chain. Regarding snubbers, the main decision here is bridle versus a single line, and for monohulls, it pretty much boils down to a single line over the roller being the most reasonable approach that will keep you from having a chafe problem. For a monohull or for a multi-hull, a bridle works very well because you can attach that to your connection points for your forward crossbeam to the hull, and that gives you an exceptionally strong place to attach the boat, and also gives you a nice angle there to get two lines out to the chain. Most people that have been in strong conditions, hurricanes and so forth, recommend about 35-foot long adjustable length snubber and from nylon, so that it can stretch a bit and absorb some of the shock loading that will occur if you're in really strong wind. You got to remember that the boat will be yawing back and forth. It doesn't just straight point into the wind. So as it yaws back and forth, the snap loading occurs at the end of those yaws, one side or the other. So that's where you get more load than you would normally get if you were just pointing straight into the wind all the time. And then, of course, the attachment to the chain from the snubber is important. Several different options here. Chain hook, which people have been using for years. The claw, which is a little newer way of making the attachment. A shackle, some people use shackles. And most recently, the soft shackle, which is what I like. A couple things to consider with the attachment. One is that you'll be able to get it attached to the chain and off the chain should you have to bail out of the anchorage quickly without having to dump the entire thing and maybe cut your bridle or your snubber. Shackle works okay, but you've got to keep track of the pin. And if you drop the pin, then you're out of luck. You better have a spare available. The soft shackle is a really nice option because it's lightweight. You can make up 3 or 4 of these. They'll last a long time, and you can actually see what's happening if they do start to chafe. I'm told by people that have used them, and I plan to start using one, that they last at least a year, maybe more. And as long as they're made out of something really strong like EM steel or Dyneema, that is an excellent way to attach your snubber to a bridle.
You should only have all chain, of course. A lot of Scandinavians like to think, oh, half chain, half rope, but that's because they've never anchored anywhere where there are corals that will cut your rope in half without any issue at all. So obviously all chain, it should be galvanized chain and not stainless, because stainless is subject to crevice corrosion, and all of a sudden one day it will break, it will part, even though looking at it you say, well, there's no corrosion on it, but it's actually corroded from the inside out. We feel you should have an electric winch, because we're not young enough to haul a 30-kilo anchor and 50 or 60 meters of chain up out of the water with our muscles. We have 100 meters of chain, and I feel that's about enough. If you're in the Pacific especially, you'll find that you'll end up anchoring places where it might be 20 meters deep, and you do want to be able to get four to one scope out. So you need 80 meters or so. And we like to preach that you should anchor every night as if you're expecting a storm to come through. Even though you're not expecting it, you should be anchoring up as if you're thinking, tonight we're going to be sitting in here in 40, 45 knot winds. And you have to make your anchoring, your ground tackle, so that you can do that without having to spend an hour doing it. So we drop our anchor, and we have what we call an industrial strength snubber. It's an 1.25 inch 3-braid nylon rope, a bridle really that attaches to the chain and goes from there back to each of the forward clamps. It takes up a lot of energy if the chain ever stretches tight. But we do all that in just a couple of minutes. And because we anchor as if we're expecting a storm, because we have a big anchor, Winnie and I sleep like little babies. We don't worry about anchoring. We're not nervous. We know that our anchor will hold. And that's the best thing you can say about anchoring. Do you know that your anchor will hold? Yes, we do.
Get a big anchor, and like you say, anchor yourself so that you sleep well at night. Expecting big winds, and then we also say expect to have to turn 360 degrees, because we have seen squalls come in from the opposite direction, and seen people that, they like that beach, it's so wonderful, that they wanted to anchor really close to the beach, and then they ended up so close to the beach they were actually on it when the squall came in, and we had to help them pull them off again. Okay, so we've heard some cruisers talking about general situations of anchoring, and next we'll go to the subject of a couple special situations. So, we begin by talking to Rob. Did you ever have to anchor on 2 anchors, Rob?
One of the criteria for the boats we selected was that it have a bow rollers where we could have 2 anchors ready to go at all times. And that was a criteria. The island packet that we bought met that criteria, and I was forever glad that we did that. In the Bahamas, it's very common to anchor with 2 anchors, doing what's called a Bahamian moor, so that you basically hang to one anchor when the current's one way, and then when the current changes, you hang to the other anchor. But the bow of your boat stays in almost the same spot. But it requires having 2 anchors that you can drop easily, pick up, retrieve easily, and that you have a good system for doing all of that. And that was a big, important element for us in what boat we chose. We rarely anchored with 2 anchors off of the bow, where you hang to 45 degrees on 2 anchors. We felt it was better to have 1 anchor secure than 2 halfway. And if there was some reason that your 1 anchor wasn't secure, do something to secure it. There were a few times when we felt the bottom just wasn't good, and we might do a second, but not very often. The Bahamian moor is a different situation. You're doing it to limit swinging room in crowded anchorages that have a lot of current.
the other thing we could add would be use of multiple anchors, putting more than one anchor out. And the issue here is, again, each anchor you put out has to be big enough for the conditions, compatible with the right bottom, and used with enough scope. A lot of people will buy a big main bower and then a smaller secondary anchor because it's more convenient to use, but it's of no use if it's too small for the conditions, the wrong design for the bottom, or used with inadequate scope. As far as putting more than one anchor out, that's done, and it's all dependent on the situation and what you're trying to achieve. We sometimes put the second anchor out by veering the boat over to where we want the second anchor to lay. Sometimes we use the dinghy. We've been in conditions so severe that it's unsafe to do either, and we have to swim the anchor out. And we do that by attaching enough flotation along to the anchor and along the road that it'll stay off the bottom while we swim it out. So we consider masks, snorkels, and swim fins, anchoring gear. And in colder weather or colder water, even a wetsuit. There's several ways you can use your dinghy to get the anchor out. There's a lot made about whether you put all the road in the dinghy and pull it out of the dinghy as you motor out, or you keep it all on the boat and pull it out as you row out with the dinghy. Again, I think the difference, which you do, is dependent on the circumstances. Primarily, which way the wind or current is going. If you're going downwind or down current, there's no problem with just dragging the road off the main boat. If you're going upwind or up current, it usually works better if you have all the road in the boat. However, no matter what you do, you want to have either a float or some additional line in the dinghy with you in case you come up short. You can use one dinghy, which most of us usually do, or you can use dinghies in tandem with the dinghy in the front providing the motive power, and the dinghy in the back is the one that's controlling the road and anchor.
Okay, thanks Rudy and Rob for insights and ideas about anchoring with two anchors.
The other thing that we perfected, and it came in handy in the Pacific and in the Med, where often you are current rowed, so your boat is hanging sideways to your anchor and the waves are making you roll very badly. Now, folks on trimarans don't have to worry about that, but I had a rig that I'll see if I can describe it. We had a method where we could anchor in rolly anchorages so that we wouldn't roll. And what we would do is we would anchor normally with our all chain rode on our Delta, and then I would hook a long line, like a 60-foot line. I would have a chain hook go over my anchor rode, and I would take this long line to one of my stern winches, and then I would crank in on that line, and so you could basically get to where your anchor was 90 degrees to your boat, so it's going off your beam, and so that the anchor would be coming toward your boat, and then one end of it with the main road would go to the bow, and another line would go to the stern, so that you were hanging beam on to your anchor. And if you were in a rolling anchorage, you could do that so that you could take the waves on the bow. And that was very effective for us, and we did it quite frequently. Much easier than anchoring a second anchor off the stern, which we sometimes did, and then crank on your winch and crank your stern around. And if you do that, you need to have a lot more scope than what you would normally do, because you're putting a significantly larger load on your anchor tackle. I think there's diagram of this on my website on the seamanship page.
Hey, thanks for that, Rob. I think a lot of people will appreciate knowing this technique to do when we find ourselves in those annoying anchorages with those sideways swell to keep from rolling so terribly.
And there are special situations like Tuamutos and Tuamuto style anchoring. And you want to talk about that one? Okay.
We've sent a picture.
We sent a picture of Tuamuto style anchoring. And in reality, what happens when you're anchoring in Tuamutos, there's so many coral heads that you don't want your chain to get caught or wrapped around coral heads. So you let out 10 or 15 meters of chain and back down on it. Then you attach a fender, let out another 15 meters, attach another fender, and you keep going. And the fenders keep your chain above the coral heads so that the chain is almost floating at the top of the water. And then if when the wind comes, not if it comes, and you start, your boat starts pulling backward, it pulls the chain taut. That's the kind of anchoring you have to use in the Tuamutos, because otherwise your chain will wrap around the coral head, and you have all kinds of issues. You'll get stuck. You have to dive on it to get it off. Sometimes it'll really be stuck. One person we know got his chain caught on coral head, and he had pulled it in on his winch when a big wave came along, and the chain was so tight that when the boat lifted up, it couldn't pull the chain off the coral, so it ripped his anchor winch completely out of the front end of his boat.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's a lot of dangers involved in that kind of thing.
We did the same thing when we anchored in the Tuamotus, because there's so many coral heads that you don't want to, first of all, beat up the coral, and second of all, you don't want to wrap yourself around a coral head and get short-chained. So we did pretty much the same thing that you did with your fenders, except we used hard buoys. And the hard buoys, you can find them real easily in the Tuamotus on any island when you go beach combing, because they're all over the place, from the pearl farms and the fishing boats. So anyway, the reason hard buoys might be an advantage over fenders is that when you use a fender can compress when it goes further underwater. The pressure of the water will compress the air, and then you won't have as much buoyancy on your fender, and so it may not hold the chain up, especially if it's in if it's the first buoy that's in the first fender that's in the deeper water. Whereas a hard buoy will keep the same buoyancy no matter what, even if it gets pulled down underwater. We would figure out, looking on the hard buoy, which says how much buoyancy it has, and then we would do some tests where we'd let out some chain, hook a buoy on it, then let out some more chain, and see how much chain we could put for each buoy. And then after we knew that standard, when we anchored in the coral area, we would put the last, say, 100 feet of chain with 3 different buoys before the anchor, and that would hold the chain up so that we had enough scope that the chain was still holding on the anchor and wasn't being pulled up by the buoys, and yet we had enough scope that would hold us above the coral so that we would have enough elasticity on our chain and we would never get short-chained, and we would protect the coral.
Anchoring is a religion, it's not a science.
Okay, I think you got that right, and everyone has the prayers and their rituals and all of that they say and do for the anchoring. And you're right. It's either you're going to sleep well at night, or you're going at any little puff of wind, you'll be eyes wide open and running out and seeing if you're all okay. All right, there you have a number of practical ideas on anchoring and some techniques and something to do in some special situations. And if you haven't developed your own standard operating procedure for anchoring yet, we hope you got some valuable ideas to help reduce the stress of anchoring and keep the peace among the crew. All right, now we move away from anchoring to our short subject. Melinda and I are conversing about another wonderful group that we meet while cruising. That's one of the things the SSCA is really known for, is getting to know other cruisers. So go ahead, you're an expert.
Well, this is one of my favorite topics because the first thing I'm going to say is fly your burgee, fly your SSCA flag. If you fly your burgee, when you go into an anchorage, people look for that burgee, and you're sitting there and you see these burgee. It's a wonderful way to get to know people. You take your dinghy, you go over and say, hey, you're an SSCA member, so are we, and the conversation begins, because people love to get to know each other. And my husband and I, when we first really started cruising, not just sailing but cruising, we would pull into an anchorage, and it was just amazing how somebody would call on the radio and say, come over to, you would say Seashell, anybody wants to have cocktails or have sundowners, everybody called us sundowners, have sundowners at 5 o'clock, come on over to Seashell. Oh my gosh, you'd have like 6 or 7 dinghies show up, and the conversation would start, and it would go for like 2 or 3 hours. And people really get to know each other. You had so much in common as far as the sailing, and people wanted to pick each other's brains on destinations or things going wrong with the boat or whatever. It was fun. It was great fun. Some of the people that are still very, very close friends, we met just that way, having sundowners together, flying the SSCA flag is such a good way to get people to know each other, and you can educate each other, you can help each other out, and we just really enjoyed that. Don't be afraid if you're a newbie. Okay, and you pull into an anchorage and you don't know anybody. Don't be afraid to get in your dinghy and dinghy over to another boat and say, "Hey, we're brand new. We're new cruisers. We just want to introduce ourselves. Maybe you have a question about something in town or whatever." And I'll tell you right off the bat, people will start the conversation, and you'll get to know each other immediately. People just suck you right in. That's all I can say. It's not hard to meet each other at all, and they will start having maybe on shore on the island. You find a little local restaurant where everybody will meet, have drinks, play dominoes, or play a game, some kind of game. Farkle is the other big game that the cruisers all love to play. And you have a whole gang, and more people come, and it gets livelier and livelier. And then all of a sudden you're doing this, 2 or 3 times a week. And that can be a lot of fun. And a great way to get to know each other. Another thing, we used to laugh because on the days that we had to go do laundry, we'd throw all of our laundry into a dinghy and go into town and to wherever the local laundromat was, and you'd find like 5 or 6 different sailors in there, and it would be social hour, and we all sit around and have social hour while we were doing our laundry, and that was great. And then maybe we'd say, okay, well, let's all meet for lunch afterwards, or come over to Seashell at 5 o'clock and for sundowners. So that was all very spontaneous, and it's so easy to get to know people. Don't isolate yourself and just keep to yourself and think, well, I don't know anybody, nobody knows me, and I'm afraid. Don't be afraid. Take your dinghy around and meet people. That's kind of what I have to say about that.
Yes, one thing that we notice nowadays with the internet so prevalent, that so many cruisers, they come in, they don't go over and ask the other boat any questions or advice or anything. Oh, maybe you know a little bit about this island and that sort of thing. They think they can just go on Google and get all the information, and we've lost a lot. We've lost a lot of that communication with others, and so your idea is very good. People should fly their flag, and if they're afraid of it getting all blown out, well, then only stick it up in a crowded anchorage. I mean, when you get to the crowded anchorage, but it's a good conversation starter. And some people that don't know the flag might even say, "Well, what is that?" And then you can start the conversation from there.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you're on passage and you think the flag's gonna get all ripped, I mean, take it down. Like you said, when you come into an anchorage, then you can fly it. But it's part of the cruising experience is getting to know people. My husband and I, one of the things we did as volunteers for SSCA was we would have with spontaneous gams.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. We would all you had to do is announce on the radio that we'd go to a restaurant, we'd say, do you care if we bring some people? We don't know how many people it will be. It could be 5, it could be 20, whatever. Do you mind if we do that? And they tell us like off hours, when they weren't the busiest, to have it then. We'd make the announcement on the radio, and we'd say, come. We're going to have a little game. We're going to introduce some people. We might have a speech. Maybe if we were lucky, we'd get somebody that would stand up and talk about something interesting. There was all kinds of. We had one time we did tables where destination tables where people wherever they were going they could sit at that table, and it was so much fun. Well, one of them we did. This was in Grenada. One of them we did. We had 75 people show up. It's just like, oh my gosh. Took over the entire restaurant. The restaurant manager, he handled it. He did very well, and he made a ton of money that day. So you just never know. But it's so much fun. We got to meet so many people, and people got to meet each other, and so on. But anyway, those are the kind of things that will happen.
Well, I hope a lot of newbies and even the present people sailing listen to this, and they can get some ideas about how to go back to the good old days of meeting people instead of just Mr. Google. Okay.
There are times when we had issues where we really needed help or somebody else needed help, and we went to their rescue. There's things that you cannot get off the internet. So you need to have the camaraderie with people and get to know people's skills. Let me just say a quick story. We were in an anchorage one time, and a guy who is a refrigerator, licensed refrigerator man, had called on the radio and said, we're coming into, I don't remember what island we were on, but he said, we're coming into such and such island. I'm a certified refrigerator repairman. If anybody has a refrigeration problem, let me know. My boat is such and such, and we'll be in about an hour. Well, before he ever got anchored, there were like 5 or 6 dinghies dinging out to his boat, waving money at him. We need our refrigerator fixed. We need it fixed. The guy had so much work to do for the next week fixing people's refrigerators. So, that's not a skill that you're going to get on the internet. And that when you need that kind of help and people are available there to help you, I mean, he thought it was great. He earned a lot of money, and he was able to fix everybody's refrigerator. So, and that's a fun story,
Yeah, a perfect story. Yeah. That's great. Yeah. Thanks, Melinda. Yeah, you're so right. Nothing virtual replaces actual people-to-people friendships. And SSCA has always been about camaraderie, and I hope all the SSCA members keep making it a point to meet one another. In our tips and tricks category, Bill is going to tell us an unusual thing to do with Ziploc bags. So Bill, in episode 3, you told us about the best bucket. And you showed how it had one flat side so that you could stick it on the side of the boat to catch water. Well, can you elaborate on how to even collect more water in that nice bucket?
If you are going to catch water in this, you might want to block off some other scuppers on the boat and take a look at the Ziplock sandbags. Use these to block off the other scuppers so it'll direct the water down to your bucket. And these are also great paperweights around the cockpit for charts and that sort of thing. Ziplock sandbags.
Okay, great and clever idea. To wrap up, as promised in the intro, Sherry McCampbell is going to leave us with some great reflections about why we love this lifestyle. Sherry, what is cruising for you, and what's its attraction?
Cruising for me. Well, some cruisers cruise to travel, and some cruise to sail, just because they like to sail. Some cruise to go to beaches and go diving. Some cruise for parties. As a teenager, cruising for me was the time I got away from all other distractions, and I could sit and read a book all day long because there was nothing else to do. And I really loved that, actually. And so for at some point in my life, cruising was about reading and solitude. Some cruisers cruise for culinary experiences, the cultural side of meeting people from different countries. And I know a number of people really love when they go to a different country to learn what's in their local markets and the cooking styles and new recipes and all of that. So some people cruise just for the cultural side. For me, it's all of those things. I love to sail. When we weren't cruising, I owned a racing sailboat, and I absolutely just love to sail. I love to travel. I love to see all the different places. And as a cruiser, we carry our own little house with us, so we can afford to get to places that are very difficult to get to without a sailboat, and we can stay as long as we want. We can afford to be there for a long time and interact with the real people that live in that country rather than the people who are at a hotel. For us, it's about travel. It's about diving. We like fish. We like warm weather and, beautiful beaches and azure waters. We like to go hiking. So it's all about all of those things for us.
I like the way you point out that cruising can be so many things for so many people. And you're right. So thanks for that, Sherry. A great way to close this episode. So, did you get some actionable ideas you can use for yourself during this episode? Something to practice while anchoring? An idea how to meet some new cruisers at the next port? Or how to improve your water collecting off the deck using Ziplock sandbags? Or remembering to take time at the end of the day to be grateful for the many ways that cruising has enriched your life, whether it was by forcing you to rise to a challenge that you ultimately succeeded, or by gently painting an ever-evolving sunset that exploded the senses with its glory. So remember, fly your burgies and swallowtails and invite others to join SSCA to benefit from sharing knowledge, ideas, personal friendships, and getting access to all the great stuff we present in the Easier and Safer Cruising Summit. Talk to you next time. We hope you enjoyed listening to our guests and took away some new ideas for yourselves. If you have something to say about any subject you heard, it's not too late to join in. Be sure to check out the preview of our next episode. Comment and subscribe on SSCA YouTube channel. Share this video on your social media. And join the camaraderie by participating in our coming new episodes. If you're not a member yet, visit ssca.org to get in on the conversation and gain full access to the SSCA Easier and Safer Cruising Summit.